Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. I am very happy to be joined by David Marx. David, welcome.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. So we are going to be talking about this week's topic. This week here at B&H Photo, across all the boards, we're talking about night photography. So full disclosure over here, I don't know anything about night photography. In fact, most of the time I don't make it past maybe 9 p.m. before just passing out and going to sleep. So some of this stuff probably is needed a little bit more time to stay awake to catch some of these photos. But maybe hopefully David's going to share something with me today that I can capture within that like 8 to 9 o'clock window to capture something in that time frame. But he's going to be talking about how to create a basic time-lapse video clip of the night sky. So everybody who's joining us today, whether you're joining us on YouTube, Zoom, live stream, Facebook, any of our streaming channels, please feel free to get any questions you may have in. You could use the comment tool, or you can go ahead and use the Q&A on the Zoom. Otherwise, David, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I know you've got a ton to cover, and we're really excited to see what you have to share with us. So thanks for being here today, and take it away.
Thank you. First, it's truly an honor to be invited to speak at the virtual event space again. And I had no idea I would be the first presenter for the night week. So thank you so much. Today, I want to talk for about 50 minutes, 1 hour, on one of my favorite things, which is creating simple time-lapse video clips of the stars slowly moving across the sky at night. And I think if you give me 50 minutes or so of your time, that I can teach you a basic skill. But I'm going to assume for this that you know two things in advance: a tiny bit of Adobe Photoshop Lightroom Classic, and a tiny bit about how to use a DSLR or mirrorless camera at night. I'll make this as basic as I can, as simple as possible, but those two skills, a tiny bit of Lightroom, a tiny bit of familiarity with your camera, I think those are necessary prerequisites. The other thing I want to do in advance, I want to apologize, one, that there might be some background noise. It's summer, I'm in Montana, that's construction season. I'll do my best, but if the dump truck or the leaf blower or whatever goes off in the background, please forgive me. Second, via Zoom and live stream, the little time-lapse video clips that I'm going to show today, they don't look as smooth as they really are in reality. So if they look a little chunky, a little compressed on your screen, please know that your results will be better than what I'm showing. So with that, let me stop the video of me a second and let me share my screen. Give me 1 second here. And hopefully at this point, you are seeing my screen. So what I want to say first, if you're looking for more info about me, I have a website called focusphotoschool.com. That's where you'll find my Lightroom, Photoshop, photography tutorials. You can also find me at YouTube, same thing, Focus Photo School, that's me. I'm on Instagram, I'm David Marx Photo on Instagram. The reason I bring this up, apologies for the shameless self-promotion, what I did to get ready for today's lecture, I made a new blog post at that Focus Photo School website. I'll slap the link into the chat in a second here so that everyone can see it. The reason I did this, at this blog post, you'll find two things that I thought might be helpful. First, if you want to download the example images that I'm playing with today, I created a link so you can download them from Google Drive. Second, I posted the videos that we're going to create throughout this little presentation on this webpage, so that if you want to see them, you can click to play them at a much higher resolution than will work through Zoom. Okay, so the way I want to teach this today, I want to run a little PowerPoint. So let me get PowerPoint started. I want to cover some basic fundamental skills, and then I want to hop in and out of the PowerPoint and show you parts of this live using Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Lightroom Classic. So what I want to start with is how to make a time lapse in general, nothing to do with night photography, just what is time-lapse photography. And there are basically three steps, three phases in time-lapse creation. First, we go outside, we put our camera on a tripod, and we aim it at something where there is motion. That's key. You got to shoot time-lapse of a moving subject. The camera doesn't move, but the subject does. And what we're going to do is we're going to shoot photo after photo after photo for, say, 1 hour or 2 hours or 5 hours or months, depending on how fast the motion and how long the video you want to create. So we're going to shoot a long series of consistent images. I'm going to suggest raw files from a DSLR advanced mirrorless camera will be really helpful. Next, we're going to bring those raw files home. Let's say a whole memory card's worth of them. And we're going to process those images to make them brighter, cleaner, more colorful, more vibrant, using a program like Lightroom Classic. When the images all look good, we're going to create a copy of them as JPEG files. We're going to export a large set of JPEGs. And then we're going to use a program like Photoshop or Premiere or Adobe After Effects to tie those individual frames together into a smooth continuous video. For today's demo, I'm going to show using Photoshop. It's not the most full featured, but it's very, very easy. And for those of you who are subscribing to Adobe's Lightroom Classic plan, it comes bundled with your subscription. So you needn't pay for anything else. So let me show you what I mean here. Do you remember when you were a kid and you would color on like the side of a notebook and you would flip the pages of that notebook and your little stick man would dance around? That flip animation, that is basically time-lapse video. The only difference is our computer is going to flip through the photos that are on the screen fast enough to fool the eye into the illusion of smooth, continuous motion. It's just photo, 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 photo. But if we flip them back fast enough, it appears as smooth, dynamic motion. Now, to do this kind of photography, you need some basic equipment. You need a DSLR or mirrorless camera. You need something basically that can shoot raw files. You definitely need a sturdy tripod. This is a type of photography where hand holding isn't going to work well for you. We need the camera to stay steady, let's say, through an entire hour or through the evening. Next, we're going to need a gizmo called an intervalometer. And an intervalometer is basically a camera trigger that will tell the camera to shoot again and again and again, so that you don't have to stand there and click the little button on the top of the camera, say 300 times. It will fire it for us. Now, most modern DSLR type cameras have an internal time-lapse photography mode. If you have that mode, if your camera can be programmed to shoot photo after photo after photo, say 300 times, then you don't need to buy that separate external intervalometer. My cameras don't, but a more recent camera would. Finally, like I said, we're going to need some basic software, something like Lightroom Classic and Photoshop to turn our raw files into a nice, smooth video clip. The other one, since this is a night photography talk, is you're going to need a high quality wide angle lens. Basically, we want a lens that shows us a wide swath of sky so that as the stars slowly arc across it, they won't slide out of our frame instantly. And so that we can see the dynamic motion of the stars over, say, an hour, 2 hours, a long period of time. For this, I have great news. Manual focus lenses, and B&H sells some very inexpensive ones, a brand called Rokinon. They also go by Bauer or Samyang. They're very inexpensive wide angle lenses. They're very nice. They fit on most brands of camera. They're great for this kind of work. Prime lenses, a fixed focus lens rather than a zoom lens, will work great for this too. The other secret, in my opinion, is gaffer's tape. And I know B&H sells this by the roll, feet, yards of it. Gaffer's tape is the other secret, not just to time-lapse photography, but to shooting at night. If you're curious, this is what a roll of gaffer's tape looks like. It's kind of expensive stuff, but oh my goodness, is it useful? And I'll get back to why in a little bit here. So what I want to make clear is that the stars at night on a nice moonless evening, they're the perfect thing for your first time-lapse experiment. The reason the stars are so great is that they move slowly. The human eye detects their motion over time. You look up and a constellation is here, you go inside, you come back out an hour later, the constellation has moved, but the actual motion of the stars is a little too slow for our eyes to see in a set increment. So with our camera, we can reveal something that the mind is aware of, but the eye might not see on its own. Also, the stars at night, with no artificial light, no moon coming up or going down, they're at a fixed brightness, right? Pretending the clouds don't roll over. And that makes time-lapse really, really easy. It's easy because the exposure at the beginning of your sequence is the same exposure at the end. So again, the three phases of creation. We're going to shoot a long sequence. We're going to edit our raw files, what we created out there in the field. We're going to spit out a set of JPEG, what I call intermediaries. Then we're going to compile those all together to make an animated sequence. Okay, so having established the three steps, now I'm going to teach them to you in backwards order. I'm going to teach them to you starting at the last and working to the first. And I want to do that for two reasons. First, I think a lot of folks get freaked out in any lecture when the words Adobe Photoshop come up. And I want to assure you that we are going to use very minimal Photoshop skills today, like 4 buttons. You can do this, even if you are not a Photoshop expert. Second, I want to teach it in reverse order because the computer stuff is really pretty easy here. And I want to save as much time as I can for questions on shooting at night at the back end of the talk. Okay, so let me show you some sort of boring PowerPoints of the Photoshop steps, and then I'll drop out of the PowerPoint and show it to you live using Photoshop. Critical skills in Photoshop are these. What we're going to do is we're going to use the file open command in Photoshop. File open, easy. We're going to guide it to a folder full of the little JPEG images that we created using Lightroom. We're then going to use a command that most people have never noticed because you had no reason to notice it up till now, a command called open image sequence. And what that's going to do is it's going to load all of our JPEGs onto a video timeline inside of Photoshop. Basically, it's that flip book animation thing. And then Photoshop is going to ask us a question. It's going to ask us, what is the frame rate that we want to flip? Meaning, how fast do we want each image to pop on the screen? 1 second, a 30th of a second, a 24th of a second. How fast should we rotate through them? And then finally, the fourth button is we're going to render the video, which is Photoshop's command for saving that clip out as a MP4, an MOV, a file that you can play on your computer screen, put on YouTube, Vimeo, Facebook, etc. So just to show before I go live with this, in Photoshop, there is a secret little command for time-lapse photography. It's this one in the open dialog called image sequence. I promise I'll show it to you again in just a second here. When we use that command, expect that Photoshop is going to ask, what frame rate do you want to use? And here, I'll just say that 30 frames per second, that's considered the standard rate for super high quality, silky smooth time-lapse video. A slower frame rate, something like 24 frames a second, will make your video clip last a little longer, but it might make moving objects appear a little choppier. Now, there are no absolute rules here. I personally think stars look fine, great, at 24 frames per second. I think 30 is a little faster and smoother than we really need. But play with this one. Feel free to experiment. The last steps in Photoshop are to render a video. And here, this part is scary, intimidating, but have no fear. I am not a video expert. I'm a still photographer. I have no training in all the complexities of video, and I don't need to. There is a preset inside of Photoshop from the factory. There is a default using something called H.264 that is perfect for YouTube, for your computer, for Facebook, Vimeo, etc. All we have to do is pick that format and the high quality setting, and Photoshop will take care of the rest for us. I promise. This is what the render video screen looks like. These are the settings that I'm going to use. I promise I don't know what any of these other buttons mean, just the stuff in the little red box. That's all we need to concern ourselves with. Okay, so here, let me pause my PowerPoint a second and let me open up Adobe Photoshop for you. Hopefully you're seeing Photoshop on the screen. I hope so. Okay, well,
Yeah, we see
from the
it. We see
factory.
it.
Oh, perfect. Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right. So from the factory, Adobe Photoshop can be a little overwhelming. It has all these panels, all these floating toolboxes. The good news is we don't need any of these, the standard factory defaults, for what we're going to do today. Instead, the only buttons we need are inside of what's called the timeline window in Photoshop, this guy here. Well, to make life even simpler, I've designed my own little workspace in Photoshop that hides everything but the timeline away so that this box is all I have. For this, what I'm going to do is go File, Open, plain old open command. I'm going to guide it to a folder on my desktop where I have a sequence of little JPEG files. Now, when I click on the first one, I need to click on this options button right here. This is the secret. And then I get this command, the one that says image sequence. Now, I want to slow down just a second here because if you haven't clicked on a photo, you won't find that this image sequence button is enabled. For some reason, you have to go into a folder, click on a single image, and then you get this button right here. When I hit open, though, what I'm going to do is not open this single photo, but this whole long stack of photos. There's like 300 of them. So I'll hit open, and Photoshop will then say, oh, okay, how fast should I put these, should I flip these in front of your eye? For now, I'll just say 30 frames per second, and I'll hit OK. And what it's done is it's created a video for me. Now, I'm going to press this little play button right here. And at first, it's going to look really, really terrible. I'll explain why in just a second here. So really, really terrible at first. The reason it looks terrible at first in Photoshop is this thin blue line, which is the rendering line. The first time you play it through, Photoshop hasn't rendered the video yet. So let it play through once or twice, and it will get nice and smooth. All right, so let's say that you've compiled the photos together, you get the stars moving across the sky, and you're really happy. Well, now we need to save this out as a video file because otherwise we could only see it inside of Photoshop. For that, there's this little button right here. This is the render video shortcut button. So we click on this one. It opens up a new window for us. It'll take it a second. And in this video, in this window, all I have to do is give it a name. I'll call it, say, demo number 1. We'll tell it where to put it on the desktop. And here's that secret again. We're going to pick 8264 at high quality. That's all we need. I'll hit render, and Photoshop will save out my video file so that I can close this screen right here. I'm not going to worry about saving the timeline. And here is the demo that I just created. Now, I promise when I play this on my computer, it's not going to look all that great. And so just to hopefully convince you that this worked well, let me remind you that back on my website, I have this page. The link should be in the chat. And here's the video I just made. But this time what I've done, I've uploaded it to Vimeo so that it's playing back not just through, let me reload that. There we go. This is what we just created. It seems like with Zoom, I get better, smoother video playback if I upload the files in advance. Hopefully you're seeing something where the moon sets, the stars slide gracefully across the sky. This is what we can create using any old DSLR camera, a tripod, and a tiny, tiny bit of software. All right, let me just show this one more time. I see there's a question in the chat. I'll get to it in just a second here, because I really want to convince you that the Photoshop skills, they're nothing to be afraid of. All I did in Photoshop was go File, Open. I'll lead it this time to a different folder full of my little JPEGs. Let's go to, say, this one. I'll click on a single image. I'll pick image sequence. I'll hit open. I'll tell it, let's say 30 frames a second. That gives me my video. The first time I play it through in Photoshop, it will be a little choppier. This time we have the Aurora Borealis, one of my favorite things on rare occasions that I get to photograph dancing across the sky. But at first it looks really, really chunky. So let it play through once or twice. The second time, the third time, it will be much, much smoother. When you're happy, we click the render button. We use H.264, high quality, and that will spit it right out of Photoshop to a file that you can upload, that you can send to Facebook, YouTube, etc. Just to show you the results here, I'm not going to bother rendering it because I already have. Just to show you the results of that sequence ought to look something like this. And if it works the way I hope, we'll get to see a little bit of the aurora moving across the sky. Simple, beautiful, and hopefully easy inside of Photoshop. Okay, so let me just take a look at the question. The question was, are there any alternatives to Lightroom? And can I do this on an iPad or a tablet? To Lightroom, good question. You don't have to use Lightroom, but we do want to use a program that allows us to process bulk images if we're looking for the highest quality results. As far as doing this on an iPad or tablet, yes, it can be done, but I think that the computer is easier if you're after maximum image quality. That said, there are apps that we can add to a phone or a tablet that shoot time-lapse and compile it inside that mobile device. I don't think they're going to do as well for you at night with the stars as a big camera would, but it is a fun way to shoot like daytime time lapses using your iPad only. All right, so let me hop back into Keynote here for just a second, because I hope that I've taken the fear of the Photoshop part, step 3, out of this for you. Let's talk real quick then about the second part, working backwards, where we need to process all the photos that we shot when we were out there in the field under the stars. This is what I call the bulk image processing. And the reason I like programs like Lightroom or something similar is because working on each and every photo, let's say we shot 300 photos, it took us 3 hours, working on those one by one, that's not efficient or consistent. What we want is software that will let us fix one image and then copy and paste what Lightroom Classic calls synchronizing the improvements we made from the first photo or the best photo to all of the others from that shoot. We don't want to have to go one by one. We want to do this as efficiently and as consistently as possible. The other thing we have to do with our software is we're going to have to crop our photos. And this part is a little heartbreaking. The problem is that your computer screen, your phone, your tablet, YouTube, all of these devices, they use a 16 by 9 shaped rectangle. That's the proportions of a standard computer monitor, of a tablet. But unfortunately, our DSLR camera, even most mirrorless cameras, they don't shoot 16 by 9. That's not their default. They shoot 3 by 2. And there's no way that you can divide 16 by 9 by 3 by 2, or in the mirrorless world, 4 by 3 evenly. There's no multiple that turns 3 into 16. So the problem is our cameras are creating a different shaped rectangle than our screens can display. And so we have to crop into the photos we captured to make it fit in the shape that YouTube will display for us. This is a little frustrating for someone like me who was taught to fill the frame when I'm shooting photos with stuff of interest, because I have to cut something away to make my video. But I promise cropping in Lightroom to the 16 by 9 ratio is a piece of cake. The last thing we're going to do in Lightroom, after we've processed our photos, after we've cropped them is we're going to spit out that folder full of JPEG files that I was using Photoshop to flip through just a second ago. In Lightroom Classic vocabulary, the saving a JPEG copy is called export. When we export, when we save a copy of those raw files, we're going to make them JPEGs. We're going to use the sRGB color space at maximum quality, and we're going to tell it how tall and how wide we want those files to be. For 720p video, we would use 1280 pixels wide by 720 pixels tall. For 1080p video, we would use 1920 pixels wide by 1080 pixels tall. Don't sweat the numbers. I promise I'll show you what I mean. So to do that for you live, let me hop into Lightroom Classic here. Give me 1 second. And what I have in front of you here, I have a long sequence of photos from the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And as I hold the arrow key down on my keyboard, you can kind of see that the stars move across the sky, the clouds drift by. This was a night with a full moon, so there's a lot more light on the landscape than if it had been a moonless night. I'll go in reverse here. But unfortunately, these files, these raw files, straight out of the camera, they don't look right. To the camera, moonlight is actually the color of daylight, not the color that we see. And let's not get into it for now. I know there are other talks this week on shooting the moon, on photographing at night, but basically, with our night photos, we're going to have to change something like the white balance, meaning how yellow is it, how blue is it? So in this case, let me lower the white balance to something closer to what we see as moonlight. We see moonlight as very dark and very blue. Well, let me make these a little darker. Let me add a little contrast. Let's make this, something like this. Now, you can adjust anything and everything that you want inside of Lightroom. You can get as sophisticated as you want inside of here. I'm just going to make a couple basic adjustments for now. You can do anything you want in here, including increasing the brightness or the darkness, the saturation, whatever. The important part, though, is that all of these sliders that I've moved, all of these adjustments I've made, I don't want to have to then type them in again on the next photo and again on the next photo. And I don't want to vary them. If I vary them, my video won't look consistent. So the reason I'm such a big fan of software like Lightroom Classic is in Lightroom, I can tell it, I want to take everything I did to this photo and copy and paste those same settings to all the others. In Lightroom, the easiest way to do this is to select them all and to make sure the one that you have adjusted is the most selected. In this case, this guy right here at the top. And then I can use Lightroom's sync develop settings command to tell it I want to copy all of the changes that I made to all of these others. And when I hit synchronize, it will paste the same settings on all the others. And you'll see right in front of your eyes how they all begin to get that moonlight blue kind of look. Now, that was great. That's the key to consistency, but I kind of skipped a step. Remember I said that this rectangle, the original capture ratio, this is not going to fit inside a video. So the step that I also need to do before I'm done is to crop this image. And that's what this tool in Lightroom does for us. And what I need to do here is enable the padlock. That's the aspect ratio lock. And then I can pick the 16:9 ratio. And here I have to cut off either some of the top or some of the bottom to make this guy fit nicely inside a video. I think I'll choose to crop it something about like this. And of course, I don't want to crop just this one. Let me show you what I mean. See how the others are taller, shorter? I want that same crop on all of them. So again, easy way to do that. Select all, synchronize settings, make sure that the crop is turned on. And now this time you'll see Lightroom's going to crop all of them down into that smaller shaped rectangle. This is the very fast but key element of preparing all of our photos consistently inside of Lightroom. So once they all look the same, and I'll just sort of accelerate on to the bottom here. So you can see that this will in a second look like all the others. Once you have them all processed, when they're all looking good, what we want to do is select them all because these are still my raw files. To create a JPEG from them in Lightroom, I'm going to use the export button. And in here, I'm going to tell it to put it in a folder. I'm going to tell it I want the JPEG file format at maximum quality. The only detail that's a little tricky is how big should these be. For 720 video, we will type in 1280 pixels wide by 720 pixels tall. If you're after 1080p video, something larger, this would be 1920 wide by 1080 tall for the height. Well, in this case, let's just say I go with those settings, I hit export, and Lightroom will begin to spit out a little JPEG copy of each one of these. Now, depending on the speed of your computer, spitting out 300, 400, 1,000 JPEG copies might take a really, really long time. There's nothing you need to do at this stage of the game other than walk away, let the computer run. I'm going to interrupt this just because it would take us all afternoon, and there would be nothing more exciting than watching this little progress bar go across the screen. So I'm going to interrupt it, and I'll just show you that before this video, I had rendered these. These files right here are exactly what we would have created if I had let that chug along. And if I flip through them again by holding down the arrow key on my keyboard, you can see how they would become our time lapse. If I tie them together following exactly the same steps that I did in Photoshop, this is the end product. We would get a video that looks like this. Let me just open this up for you. And when I play it, hopefully you get the stars moving smoothly across the sky. You get the clouds rolling by. You get the passage of moonlight over the walls of the Grand Canyon. All of this was made using nothing but those images, Lightroom and Photoshop, and my camera and a heavy tripod. Well, let's see. Let me hop back into PowerPoint here, and let me ask other questions at this point. All good?
I do see that we do have a question from Jerry wondering what about 4K video as far as pixel settings?
Ooh, my brain is freezing up on me, Jerry, but the only difference is that the width and height are larger. They're double 1080p. So I'd have to do some quick math, or suddenly my brain would have to tell me what those numbers are. But essentially 4K is just a larger width and height. Nothing else in the process changes. Okay, so let's get to the fun stuff. The not at the computer, but the out in the field stuff. The shooting of your sequence. And so here, what we're looking for is consistency. We want image after image where nothing changes except the motion of the stars. And the easiest way to do this is to put your camera in the scary manual exposure mode, the M on a Canon or a Nikon, Sony. In the scary manual exposure mode, you get to control the ISO, the aperture, and the shutter speed while you're out there shooting. And for time lapse, that's critical because once we start, we're not going to change any of those others. We're going to use the same ISO, the same aperture, the same shutter speed all the way through our night sky, say through the 2 hours of watching the stars drift. Likewise, we don't want the focus to change during those hundreds of photos. So we need to disable autofocus. We can disable in-camera long exposure noise reduction, anything that would make one photo different from another, or that would slow us down. So the focus part, this is what trips everyone up at night. And I'm sure that my friend Gabriel Biederman will talk more about this in his upcoming lecture on getting comfortable at night. I'm sure that many of the other presenters this week will have their own tricks on how to focus at night. But here's my secret. My secret is I don't focus at night. I focus during the day. And the reason is your camera does not know anything about stars, trees, people. Your camera only knows distance. So During the day, if you put your camera on a tripod and you aim it at something very distant, let's say a tree, a radio antenna, a building that's far, far away from the camera, when that is crisp during the day, at that same distance, that object would be crisp at night. So what we can do is we can focus during the day with our wide angle lens, knowing that we're going to go out and shoot the stars. Then we can turn off the autofocus. We can turn off the image stabilization. When we have that crisp image, we can take that gaffer's tape, the stuff that I buy by the roll from B&H, and we can tape down the focal ring on our lens so that it won't rotate anymore. What we're doing is locking the lens so that it's focused at basically an infinite distance. And once that lens is taped, you're ready to use it at night. It looks like this. I get it nice and crisp on a distant object during the day. I turn off the autofocus on the lens. I tape it all up so that that barrel in the front, that ring, won't rotate anymore. And now all I have to do is wait for night. I know at this point that the images I get should be good and sharp. So I said we were going to use the scary manual exposure mode. Well, for that, we have to have a guess at those settings, the ISO, the aperture, the shutter speed. I can tell you right now what aperture is most likely to work for you at night. It's the widest one. And the scale of aperture is a little confusing because it's fractional, only we don't see it as fractions. So let me see if I can help you help this make some sense for you. On your lens, there's a number, something like 2.8 or 4 or 5.6. That's at one end of the scale. On the other end of the scale, there's a 16, a 22, or something larger. Well, if these are fractions, the one at the other end, the 2.8, the 2, the 3, 3.5, that's going to be the widest opening in the lens. Because if you make it into a fraction, play along with me just a second here. 1 divided by 2 equals 0.5, but 1 divided by 4 is half as big, 0.25. That's what aperture does for us. So if we set it to the widest setting, the lowest number, the smallest number you have for the aperture, what you're really doing is opening up that lens as much as you can to let in as much light. And at night, that's really going to help. Now, during the day, this might be lousy advice because during the day, we would lose some of that depth of field. But at night, that's not going to really hurt us any. Okay, so we're going to set the widest aperture. Next, the shutter speed. For this, we can use an app like PhotoPills. It's one I'm really fond of, but there are others. Or we could use a website. There's a website called lonelyspec.com where we'll tell it, this is the lens and camera I'm using. What's the best shutter speed to get nice, sharp stars? Okay, so let's say we go to that app, PhotoPills. It works on iPhones, works on Android phones. I tell it I'm using, say, an old Canon 5D Mark III. I'm using a 24 millimeter lens, that the widest aperture on this lens is 1.4. And it says, okay, here's the theoretical shutter speed of 21 seconds. Good enough. Or I go to my computer, I go to that Lonely Spec website, I tell it I'm using a camera with a full frame, 24 millimeter lens. This aperture says about the same, 21 seconds. Okay, so I now know what aperture, the widest one, and what shutter speed to put in my camera in that scary manual mode. The only thing I don't know is the ISO. There, I'm going to give you some very vague general advice. I would start at around 1600. If you put in 1600 and you shoot a photo of the stars and it looks way too dark, then go higher, 3200. If you look at that photo and it looks far too bright, let's say you have moonlight, then you can lower the ISO. It's a little bit of a guessing game, but basically the ISO is the quote mystery variable that only we can only discover when we're out there in the field. So the last bit here is, let's say we've got one great photo of the stars, but for time lapse, we need hundreds of them, say 300. Well, how much time needs to pass between each photo? That's what we call the shooting interval. So the first photo goes off, and then we need to tell the camera how long to wait to shoot the second one. There's two ways you can do this interval. You can pick an arbitrary number. You could say, for example, I want the camera to shoot one photo every 25 seconds. Or you could pick an interval based on how long you're willing to stand out there in the field. No matter which method you pick, the math-based one or the arbitrary one, the thing we need to make sure is that our interval is longer than our shutter speed. Let me just explain here. If your shutter speed is 15 seconds, there is no way that you can shoot a second photo until after 15 seconds have passed, plus a little bit of time for that file to be written to your camera's memory card. So something like 16 seconds, 18 seconds, 20 seconds, that would be the minimum possible interval if we want one photo after another throughout our sequence. So there are ways to pick an arbitrary interval. There are charts like this one that would say, well, if you want photos of the sky, stars moving across the sky, shoot somewhere between 15 and 60 seconds between each interval. Alternative is we could do a tiny, tiny bit of math. We could say, how long am I willing to stand out there under the sky? Let's say 1 hour. Well, 1 hour is 60 minutes. In seconds, that's 60 times 60. Next, we would say, how long a video do I want to make? Let's say 10 seconds. And at what frame rate? Let's say 30 frames a second. So 10 times 30 is going to give us 300. If we divide one by the other, that will tell us the interval we need, how long between photos to create enough frames to make that length of video. So just to show it this way, 60 minutes times 60 seconds, 3,600 seconds. 20 seconds of video, let's say that's what we're shooting for, times 30 frames a second, we need 600 photos. If we divide 3,600 by 600, that would tell us we need one photo every 6 seconds. Of course, if we do that, our shutter speed can't be much longer than about 5 seconds, or we need to stay out even longer and longer. Okay, just to show the app that I love, PhotoPills, it has this calculator built into it in its time-lapse calculator. What we would do is we would say to it, here's how long a video I want. That's the clip length. Here's how long I'm willing to stand out there under the sky. Here's how many frames per second. And it would tell us that for this, a 15-second video at 30 frames a second, if I'm willing to wait 2.5 hours, I need to shoot one photo every 20 seconds. If you have to use an external intervalometer, this is what that would look like. And B&H sells these. They have a brand called Velo that fits a lot of different cameras. Nice stuff. And you would just tell it, shoot for me every 20 seconds. So to wrap all this up, my advice for your first experiments, start with the stars moving across the sky on a nice clear evening. Start by focusing the lens in advance. Tell it to shoot 300 photos, one after another after another. Make sure that your batteries are full. Clean your sensor, clean your lens. Make sure the tripod is nice and stable. Set up that interval, get it shooting, and then don't touch the camera again until it's shot all, say, 300 photos. That's the hard part. The hard part is not touching the camera while it's firing away image after image after image. When it's all done, bring those photos back, load them into the computer, and process them, compile it together. You'll make yourself a beautiful time-lapse clip. Well, let's see. Let me turn my camera back on. And I see there's a question in the chat. So South Coast Pix asks, what do you do if the white balance is changing over the time-lapse? Well, for simplicity, let's just say you set the white balance to cloudy or daylight, shade, so it doesn't change throughout the sequence. But if it is going to change, that's where the raw file in Lightroom would allow you to set a consistent white balance over all those photos. If you want to get more advanced, something like day to night or night to day time lapse, then we need to add some additional software, something like a program called LR time lapse that can slowly ramp the white balance from daylight to nighttime over time. That adds quite a bit more complexity, more cost, but it allows us to make those super cinematographic day to night kind of time lapse videos. I wouldn't get started there. Start with night to night, not day to night, but it can be done. Let's see. Mark Spinetta points out that there was a typo in my slide. It should be lonelyspec.com. My apologies. The Lonely Spec website has that shutter speed calculator. Well, let's see. Other questions?
Excellent, excellent. That's a great way to start off night photography week, because, like I said, there's a ton of stuff that you could take away. Me, I love the fact, talking about like the photo pills, that it does the math for you. I'm not a big math guy, and any extra, any extra headspace used on that really destroys me. So I love that, you brought that into there, and it kind of takes the guessing out of it. Amy's asking, she's new to photography and still waiting for her first camera from B&H. Thank you very much for supporting us, Amy. She just wants to make sure she's understanding what you're saying correctly. Would it be possible to shoot animals in this too, or would that mess with the focus and the smoothness of the video?
Ooh, Amy, I think for animals, we would be photographing daytime rather than nighttime. And I think in that case, the focus would probably need to change to keep up with the motion of the animals. I think that would be a little different than what I'm suggesting here, where the stars, they never come any closer, they never go any further. They stay basically at a fixed distance from us, or at least they appear to. So I think for a daytime animal kind of time lapse, let me rephrase that answer. I think I would still use manual focus, but I would want to make sure that my aperture was enough to have some additional crispness if the animals come in and out. So I'm not sure that advice would be good advice for you directly.
Great. And then Diane wants to know, in terms of exporting, does DPI or PPI matter? Would a higher resolution do anything to help out?
Great question, Diane. In this case, no, the DPI or PPI doesn't really matter. The TV screen or tablet or phone, that's the actual resolution that it's going to show at. So that number is kind of a irrelevant detail, since each device will have its own pixels per inch on the screen. 72 is the standard. I'd set it there, but the truth is it won't make any difference.
In terms of, one of the things that you mentioned that we've heard people, allude to before is, focusing in the daytime and then coming back in the nighttime, and, then setting up and getting everything set. And everybody, I think, has their own opinion on how they achieve that and how they kind of memorize where that focusing point is. Do you have any tips for anybody out there wondering about that? Do you use, the method of gaffing where the spot is, or do you just kind of like make a marking on the lens, maybe with like a grease pencil?
I like to tape that lens. That I like the gaffer's tape method, so that I know that if I'm clumsy in the dark, that I haven't accidentally changed anything. The grease pencil or a little paint dot is another. There are lenses, I should add, that are perfect, where the infinity mark on the lens actually lines up with, crisp stars. I don't happen to own a lens that I trust that much. Mine have a little slop. So I find that for me, the best method is to test during the day and tape. And that way at night, if I touch the lens or am a little sloppy, I know that it's still good and crisp. But there are certainly other methods.
Awesome. Well, David, this has been a ton of information, and you jam packed it. You said when you hopped on, you said you were going to wrap it all up in 50 minutes, and you definitely did that. You definitely made sure to deliver on that time frame. So we appreciate it. Where can people find you? Where can, people go to catch all your stuff? I know you threw that out a little bit in the beginning, but this way, for anybody who might have missed that, if they want to find you, maybe, join along, check out that page.
Sure. Well, thank you. So this is me again. My website where I teach Lightroom, Photoshop, time-lapse, etc. Focusphotoschool.com. My Instagram, David Marks Photo, all one word. And I'm also on YouTube at the same at Focus Photo School. All of those will find their way to me.
Awesome. Excellent. Well, David, it's no easy task being the first one to lead off Night Photography Week. But I think you did an absolutely amazing job. And I really want to thank you for being here and sharing all of this information. I think it's a great start. We're going to have a ton of content for the remainder of the week. So we want to remind everybody, if you haven't registered already, make sure to do so. We've got everything on the B&H Event Space page. You can go there. You can go to the live stream website and check everything out. But this is just the first of many. We're really excited to get sharing with all the night stuff. David, thanks for being here again. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. Thanks to Courtney and Danny and everyone else at B&H. And again, to plug, I know that coming up is Gabriel Biederman's Getting Comfortable at Night lecture. I'll be tuning into that one. He's a fantastic night photographer. And there are some other presentations this week that I'll be in the background on as well. Lots I want to learn.
There you go. So David, don't forget to get your questions in. Everybody else, make sure to get your questions in as well. This has been